ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special edition of Not Another Whiskey Podcast. I am your solo host this week for this episode, as Nicholas couldn't make it over here because we're recording a very special episode from the Raasay Distillery in front of a live studio audience. Yes! That wasn't planned at all. That was amazing. Well done. Thank you very much. So incredible to be here, and it was such a joyous journey, I suppose, to come from Speyside over to here. So I wish you guys listening could actually see what we're seeing right now. We're sitting at the distillery. We've got this stunning view of Skye from Raasay. We're looking over the Coolin Hills. My journey here from Speyside took about 2 hours, and driving through Skye, jumping on a little ferry, around about 10 minutes, just coming over here, seeing the distillery coming into shot as we were going on the ferry. What I love with this podcast is coming to these new distilleries that we're seeing in Scotland. And I think when we talk about this, and we're going to get into this in just a second, Raasay is one of the, I suppose, new old distilleries when you're talking about this. We're kind of getting there here with regards to what you guys are doing. And it's amazing that, I've been joined by the co-founder, Alistar Day, from R&B Distillers today. Alistar, thank you very much for inviting us over here. And Alex Pendley is here as well. He is the tour guide, whiskey extraordinaire. He's going to be chirping in here. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
No problem. It's an honour. Thank you very much.
And I think we need a round of applause from the audience as well. Yeah. Beautiful. We've talked about this beautiful location, guys, that you're in, and we're going to get into the whiskey and the distillery in just a second. I want to talk about the island first off. I mean, this is a remote place. Mm-hmm. This must have a load of whiskey history with regards to illicit distilling, I'm assuming. There was a load going on here. Alistar, was that something that influenced the location and the idea behind the Raasay Distillery?
Yeah, I think just the fact that it has got that, kind of link to illicit distilling, distilling before there was whiskey licenses and then after there was whiskey licenses. And first of all, it demonstrates the fact that you can make whiskey in this place. They could grow barley here, and they could make whiskey here. They had the water, they had everything they needed, and it was part of the culture, So that whole thing, and it helped, like in remote areas of Speyside, it helped the fact that it's an island off an island in the northwest coast of Scotland.
Can you tell us some of the stories about illicit distilling that happened here?
Yeah, there are some stories. So there's a very nice site down in Ayr, which is down towards the south, and you follow a burn up the hill and you come across. It's not really a clearing; it's still in the trees, but there's a little stone building, or what's left of a little stone building, just near the river. And as you go there, you can actually see where they would have had the still and the fire, and obviously had the water for condensing the whiskey. And it's not somewhere you would have stumbled across. You would have to have known that you were where you were going. So, ideal place.
I mean, because that's what they wanted to do, right? They didn't want to get found. And what do you think? We're going to get onto your first whiskey here in just a second. Do you think that I know you guys are lightly peated here. You're assuming that was almost the style that they were doing here?
So when we were designing the distillery, we started with, what is the whiskey going to be? What style of whiskey we're going to make? And we looked at other Hebridean distilleries. That's what you do. What is the style of the area? And it's not really that clear in terms of Hebridean style, but one of the elements was that lightly peated. So not the heavily peated Islas with Isla peat, but something that was just a bit more fragrant and aromatic and kind of wood smoke element of it. And I think, we've grown some barley here, and we've malted it with Raasay using Raasay peat, and it has very much got that kind of lighter, more fragrant element of it. So the lightly peated of what we're doing with Raasay definitely has a nod to what we think it would have been like here.
Fantastic. Love that. On that note, on this remote part of Scotland, let's chat about you opening this distillery in 2017.
Yeah.
What were the I mean, there must have been some huge challenges, right? You've got to do 2 islands to get to this place. So let's chat about you building this distillery. Like, are you insane?
No, well, not now anyway. No, I think, there obviously were challenges, but what's really interesting is when there are challenges, and there are the known challenges. And one of the known challenges was that we've got ferry. So there's a bridge to Skye now. That's great, but there's a ferry to Raasay. So we knew we had to get everything over on the ferry. So in a way, that in itself didn't become an obstacle because it was a known. The hardest part, the struggle, probably the bit that did test my sanity was actually restoring Borrowdale House. That was the toughest part because there weren't so many knowns about doing that. The actual building the distillery bit, the designing the process, so a blank sheet of paper, designing that process. Again, a lot of knowns, and a lot of elements that we were able to draw on. But refurbishing this Borrowdale House, that was the real challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
And I was looking at old pictures of the house. It seemed like it was a kind of extension, and part of that was bulldozed to make the distillery, correct? And then you left the original part of it.
When we bought the Borrowdale House, it was a disused hotel, and it was back in the kind of early 80s that the predecessor to what's now Highlands Isles Enterprise decided to turn this into a hotel. So Borrowdale House would have been the estate manager's house for Raasay House, and they ran the whole of the island going back to sort of Georgian times. And the reason they did that was to create jobs and to bring people to the island and just add a bit more vibrancy to the community. So it wasn't the most attractive to my mind. It was, as you would do in the 80s, it was all kind of extensions and added on the rest of it. So that went, kept Borrowdale House, renovated that, as I said, and then pretty much on the same footprint. The distillery is pretty much on the same footprint of where the accommodation block was. And where we're sitting now in the gathering room, that's now a restaurant where you have breakfast and dinner, this would have been the bar. And what fascinated me about that bar was not the kind of 70s, 80s wood panelling and sticky floor. It was the fact that it didn't have windows and you couldn't see that view. That was the thing. It had high levels crazy, to let light in, but you could not see that view.
Yeah. Why would you not want to do that?
Apparently it was still a great place to come, but I don't know why.
I can imagine that back in the day, just, drinking a load of whiskey, going out, and it would be like daylight outside and you've been here all night, and that kind of scenario, right? Yeah. Which is what we're going to do tonight, correct?
Yeah.
So, Alex, I want to come on to you. You live on the island, you've been here a while. How is it living in such a remote place in Scotland and dealing with whiskey?
I mean, it's different. Coming from the north of England, it's a bit of a change. But then again, it's kind of, we live right in the middle of the little village here on the island. So although it's out in the middle of nowhere, you're still very connected to the community here. So it's not really like living anywhere that remote.
And you're not from Raasay, right? I'm judging by that accent.
Not from Raasay at all. No, I'm from I say a small town, a large town in the north of England called Barnsley, and yeah.
And when you're in Barnsley, you just decided you hated people and wanted to move in the middle of nowhere. Is that it?
I mean, is it that obvious? No, so I wanted to get into whiskey. I thought, what better way than come up to Scotland? My two local distilleries, I say local loosely, there are 2 hours away in either direction. And so, it was, if I want to get into whiskey, Scotland's going to be the place to have to go to. And so, came up to Raasay this year and loving it, absolutely loving it.
Brilliant, good for you, man, good for you. And tell like, for everyone listening, tell us what your day-to-day is like. When you do tours here, what does that involve? What kind of tours do you do here at the distillery? What can people expect? Yeah,
so we're doing kind of your standard distillery tour. I wouldn't really call them standard, comparing them to other places, but it's your kind of entry into the whiskey world in essence. So we bring you in, we talk to you about where we've come from as a distillery. We then take you through our production, eventually working your way back into the tasting room to where we talk about the whiskey itself and bring it all to a close with the 2 drams and obviously the gin as well that we make. The tours that we run them very regularly through the day, but we're expanding on those and developing newer tours to come through where we take you down now to the dunnage and you get to try cask samples drawn straight from the cask into your glass.
So a more experienced kind of tour for the people.
A more kind of a more raw experience. You're getting that kind of directly. You're in the dunnage. You get that atmosphere. You're tasting the whiskey straight from the cask. It's got all the bits in it that are in there, and it's a bit more of an experience.
Well, that's a nice segue, Alex, because we haven't drunk any whiskey yet. You guys ready to drink some whiskey? Yeah! All right, let's try this first one. Alisdair, this is your, I suppose, flagship whiskey we're going to try first off. Can you talk us through this?
Yeah, so this is our signature single malt. It's the latest bottling of it. It's RO 1.2, based on our what we call Nicaea, six casks. So Nicaea is literally Gaelic for the 6. So we make 2 different types of spirit. We make unpeated and peated. We do about 6 months of each. They're both matured separately. And we have 3 different cask types, ex-rye casks, Trinquepin oak casks, and ex-Bordeaux red wine. So you've got peated in those 3 casks, unpeated in those 3 casks. 3 years, 4 years later, we vat them together, and then we reduce it down to 46.4. So this is our signature single malt from Raasay.
I love this. And, a story that I haven't told you, we went out for dinner just before recording this, and one of the things that I didn't tell you was I did a tasting. It was about a year ago, and we put Raasay in there, and there was some big brands in there as well. And what I love to do at the end of my tasting is, what was everyone's favourite? Mm-hmm. And Raasay came out number 1. Oh, yes. And I'm not going to name any other brands that were in there because a lot of them listen to this podcast. But yeah, what I love about what you've done here, and I've always said this about Raasay, you're a new distillery, everyone knows that. You haven't got an age statement on here, but this for me drinks a lot older than it actually is. Yeah. How, your background, you're very into the whole wood aspect of it. I'd say you're very much an expert on it. You think that plays a big part in it, right? With what you've done here.
Yeah. So again, we knew when we were designing the distillery, when we were designing the spirit, that to release something at 3-4 years old, we had to somehow have complexity, depth and balance. So how do you do that? So part of what we do is by making different styles of new make spirit in the distillery. So we walk around early, we've got various things that can be offered on, whether that's cooling jackets in the wash back, a cooling jacket in the line arm of the wash still, or a little purifier off the spirit still. All these things can be offered on. So we also do 3 and 5 day fermentations. So 3-day fermentation is very different from 5-day fermentation, and just having all these different elements and maturing them separately. So starting with different styles of new make spirit, maturing them separately, peated and unpeated. So rather than going for blended peated barley coming in at say 21 parts per million, we do completely plain malt, and we do peated barley that's 48 to 52 parts per million coming in. And then the different cask types. So as you said, we have the ex-rye, the Trinquepin, and the ex-Bordeaux red wine, and they all add completely different elements to the whiskey. So the rye brings that kind of black pepper spice element that from the previous contents from the rye whiskey, but you also get a little bit of vanilla and butterscotch from the North American oak, the Quercus alba. And then you've got the Trinquepin to the Quercus Muhlenbergi. So again, North American oak, but it's much more mellow. It brings a lot of colour. And there's a kind of softness to it as well as a richness, so it doesn't overpower the spirit, so it brings a lot very early on, and these casks have a high char and a high toast, so they're very active casks. And then the ex-Bordeaux red wine, so French oak, a mixture of Quercus petraea, Quercus roba, but from chateaus on the left bank in Bordeaux, so the higher tannin red wines, and 3 vintages, so it's about as far as wine will go into oak, and then our job is really to make sure that spirit not only gets the dark fruit characters from the wine, but gets past the wine and into the French oak and starts to get those savoury spices from the French oak, so things like clove. So with all of those different elements, we can bring that together, and that's our recipe, and hopefully that means that we can create complexity, depth and balance at a young age.
It's fascinating. I want to rewind a little bit and find out your story, because I know you've got history and heritage within your family, within the whiskey industry. Yeah. But you didn't start off in the whiskey industry. You started in food, right?
And then,
food, so let's chat about your kind of your granddad's recipe, going back to the.
Yeah, so it was my great grandfather actually. So he had a licensed grocery shop in Coldstream in the Borders, but that company was called J&A Davidson originally, and it was established in 1820. So I can trace my family connection to whiskey back to 1820, which I always like to say is exactly the same year that John Walker's son started the licensed grocery shop in Kilmarnock. So it's rooted in whisky heritage. And my connection through my great grandfather is what the family call a cellar book. It's actually a sales ledger for 1881, 1882, but it's got all the blends that J&A Davidson produced from 1899 to 1916. So that's my connection, and in 2009 I used that book to recreate one of my great grandfather's blends, the Tweedale. But before that, for 30 odd years, I worked in the food industry. So I did a degree in botany at Glasgow University. The very first job after that was growing mushrooms. So yeah, I know the jokes. I'm a fun guy. There's no mushroom in here. It is magic though.
All right, stop. That's a yellow card right now. One more and you're out. This podcast gets deleted.
And then that took me into fresh produce. Sharon likes to say that I was the man from Del Monte going round saying yes, then I will take that. And then that took me into dairy. So for a long time, I actually had some friends up last night and they still refer to me as the cheese man.
The cheese man.
So even though I've kind of moved on from that, that's still the connection. But I think in particular, the cheese, the dairy, that stainless steel, that fermentation, that matured element of it helped greatly in moving into.
When was the switch though for you? When did you go, I want to get into whiskey and screw it, I'm going to build a distillery in Raasay?
So 2009 was the answer to that. So was at the stage where I was thinking about having my own business, working for myself, that attraction of being your own boss. And I was talking to my dad about, do I buy a small food business? And he was like, no, you've got the book. Obviously, you've got the book. So I set about, went through the book, looked at all the different distilleries in there, all the different recipes, and realised that the Tweedale was made up of 9 different whiskies, 1 grain, 8 malts. So I went out, bought 9 casks, and put the blend back together, and it kind of went from there.
Fantastic. Shall we drink another whiskey?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Right, Alex, you're going to talk about this. We're going to move on to our next dram here, because what I love about Raasay, since you guys have opened up, you've created so many different expressions, right? And so, Alex, talk us through this next one.
Yeah, so the next one, it's the ex-rye cask. So it's the unpeated spirit that's been matured in the ex-rye, and I love it. It's not, in theory, it shouldn't be the whiskey that I really like of the unpeated side, being someone who loves very heavily sherried whiskies. There's kind of, but I think maybe that spice you get with the sherry is coming through from the ex-rye. So you get that, like Alisdair was saying, that black pepper note that comes through. So you're getting that raw experience of the spirit with the rye's influence coming in, and it's fantastic. It's really, really nice.
I mean, I think it's interesting now because you see a lot of distilleries are now experimenting with rye, and there's been a few distilleries that have been doing it for a while. They've just been keeping it on the low down. Why did you guys decide to use rye? Was there any rhyme or reason there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a number of different reasons. So when we were designing the distillery, we looked at what was happening out with Scotland. And one of the things that was very notable at the time was the kind of rise of craft distilling in the States. And those guys took what was a kind of unloved, dare I say, old man's drink, and turned it into something very cool, and very attractive. And so that whole kind of renaissance of rye in the States, and it was just like, yeah, we could just use bourbon casks, that's very traditional in Scotland, but by using ex-rye, we get that pepperiness, and in time that mellows out. I mean, this is a cask strength bottling. This is, I think, just over 62% ABV, so you're getting a little bit of that heat from the the alcohol, but then you've got that black pepper element of, and that's really what we wanted, to bring, as I said earlier, we need the complexity, we need different things. So a bourbon cask probably wasn't going to be given enough, but that rye and this, being able to do these single cask bottlings, it kind of deconstructs our signature single malt. So you start to get the pure elements of the 6 individual casks. I think that's what this does.
I think what's fascinating for me when you did what I described over dinner as one of the best distillery tours I've ever had in my life, because it was like 10 minutes. We had to get to dinner. It was just like, boom, this is it. And I loved that. And we were getting very geeky and very sort of technical within that short period of time. And one of the things I said to you was, who designed this distillery? And did they say, are you absolutely insane? Because you've done so many things. And what I love is you guys are only around about 200,000 litres a year?
Yeah, just under, I think.
Just under that?
180 last year.
But you can do so many different things within the distillery, which I think is fantastic for a small craft distillery in Scotland to be so flexible. Mm-hmm. And not only have that within the new make spirit, but also with what you're doing with maturation and the different varietals of cereal that you're using as well,
Yeah, and I think that's, one of the things we said from the outstart is that, we are a new distillery, so we want to be honestly contemporary, so this is a very new building. You've got the Georgian house in the middle, and hopefully it's all complementing, all fits together, but when you come up, when you're coming across and you see it, you know that this is a new distillery. And I think that was very important. So you've got that from an architectural design point of view, but hopefully from a process point of view as well. We don't have to make a distillery character, because it's not going to the rest of the industry. It's not going into blends. You don't have to be, this is the Raasay style, So that straight away meant we could do lots of different things. And if you look at, particularly in Japan, and how they've developed things and how they bring things together, there's that flexibility. And the great thing about having a recipe for a single malt with 6 casks and 2 different spirit types is that we can flex it. So I like to think of our signature single malt as being a band. So every time you pick up Isle of Raasay Hebridean single malt, it's that, but within a band. So if you go onto our website and you put in, R1.2, it will tell you everything. It will tell you how many rye casks, how many chinkapin casks, how many, what percentage of each. It will tell you what the yeast was. It will tell you the fermentation times. It tells you the cut points. So we have different cut points for peated and unpeated. That's all on the website. And I think the whole idea of that is, as I've said, it just, that gives us flexibility, and it means that in time, we can change things and vary things, but that actually helps us to be more consistent and produce that band. And
the transparency is fantastic to see as well.
Yeah. Hopefully a lot of that's on the label as well, but there's a lot of information, which is why most of it's on the website.
Future Raasay, what do you want to see 10 years from now?
More of the same, obviously, I think. So the recipe, that's the other thing we asked a lot, is that, so you're making this complex whiskey at a young age, but, will it age on? And the answer is absolutely yes. And, that's the flexibility of the recipe, is that it will be 10, 15 years old. And, for instance, we fill round about 1,500 casks a year. This year, 700 of those casks will be ones that we've emptied and are refilling. So about half of what we're doing, and all of that just helps us build stock that will take a little bit longer to mature, but just again keeps that complexity. So one of the things is that just building that, developing it, letting it get older, all those things. So that definitely like to see that. But also, we're 80% of all the casks we buy are those 3 different cask types, but 20% we have other casks. So that 20% we're building special releases for the future. So that's what we'd see in the future as well, that kind of series, and maybe building it around elements like barley variety, oak species, maybe the regions of where the barley comes from. Those sorts of elements into the special releases, I think, are really cool.
SWA recently, relaxed the rules on aging and what type of casks that you can use. Would you like to see more of those rules relaxed, being a new distiller? Is there anything that you want to do that you're like, oh, I'm a little bit, my hands are tied?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very old school in that. I think the Scotch whisky regulations are a fantastic thing. They're there to protect Scotch whisky, and I've always said, with a bit of thought, you can do lots of interesting things within the regulations. So I'm not actually a big fan of tequila casks and things being relaxed, but that's just me.
You don't want to do a wee mezcal cask, Raasay? Yeah? Not interested.
I think there's lots of stuff we can do.
I know you partnered up with Three Chimneys,
yeah.
Very famous restaurant on Skye.
Yeah.
Is that still going on? Is there any plans to do anything kind of future collaborations, if you like, with anyone in the area?
I think partnerships, collaborations are absolutely key, and there's a number of different things that we're doing and working on. Whether that be within the whisky industry with other people, or with the local Coolin Brewery or Three Chimneys. It's Glen Shield Chocolates as well. These are all people that we work with. So, yeah, I mean the Three Chimneys things. They did a great sort of, I think it was 5 courses paired with 5 of our different whiskies, and
nice.
It was really very nice thing to do. And I think we'll be doing more of that and trying to work with lots of different people to do different things.
Best experience you've had within the whisky industry so far? And that can be out with the distillery, it can be just something that you've done.
Probably been made deliveryman of the Worcester Company of Distillers, and just kind of being part of that industry thing, that was quite special.
Nice.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to this third expression?
Yeah.
You want to take us through what we're going to try next with you guys? How many Raasays have you guys released, by the way? What are you on right now? I think it's 6 or 7?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know, at 1.2 must be at least batch 5, I think, of the signature single malt.
Okay.
And then we've done some special releases, but this particular one is again another single cask bottling. So this is the unpeated spirit in the chinkapin. So immediately you can see the colour of that. So for a 3-year-old whiskey to have that amount of natural colour from a cask.
It's insane.
Something, yeah.
I mean, if someone gave me that blind, I'd think that was old sherry cask for a solid 12 years at least, right?
It's that colour, yeah. So that's what the chinkapin cask brings. It brings, a lot of flavour development early on, but in a way, hopefully, that it's not overpowering our spirit.
Let's talk about chinkapin, because I think, it's a fairly new variant of oak that's come in, and maybe a lot of listeners haven't heard of it. They probably have, because there's a lot of geeks that listen to this, but can you explain to me, do you enjoy working with this style of oak? Or
Yeah, I think the chinkapin is it's a huge linchpin of our recipe. So Quercus Muhlenbergi grows in all the same areas of North America as Quercus alba, and historically it wouldn't have been separated out into Quercus alba and Quercus Muhlenbergi. It was just North American white oak. But then it was probably really the kind of wine guys in America, so that whole period of over oak Chardonnays and that thing where, something like Quercus alba just gives too much oak too early on, and it's just that over oaked. So they were looking for something that was just a little bit more mellow, a little bit more interesting, something that would still bring the character they wanted but not overpower the wine. And that's when people started looking at different oak species and separating them out. So that's really where Quercus Muhlenbergi and chinkapin started to stand out. And for us, it was that worry about, fresh oak can have a bad reputation because it gives too much too quickly, and that's what Quercus alba does. So we were well aware of that when we were kind of formulating this recipe. And for me, chinkapin gives a lot of flavour development, gives the colour, but it doesn't overtake the spirit. These casks are made to our specifications. So the timber's air dried for 36 months, 3 years. So it's quite a long seasoning period before the casks are made, and then the casks have a high toast and then a high char. So the air drying and the toasting actually starts to break down the lignans in the oak. So if you just took the dry matter of oak, it would be about 52% lignin. It's that prevalent. But the thing about lignin when it breaks down is it produces volatile phenols, and volatile phenols are flavour. So anything that you can do to kind of start that process, so the air drying and the toasting does that, and then the charring obviously increases the surface area of the cask, but the charcoal itself is removing impurities. So that high char in these casks helps with our young spirit. It's actually removing some of the impurities, and when we tip the casks, it's amazing. It's just the amount of charcoal that comes out of these casks when they tip them is just something else.
That's the thing that I didn't realise with you guys as well. Apart from malting the barley, you do everything on site here, right?
Yeah, so everything, we've got our own well on site, so the water's used for every part of the process. It's cooling, fermentation. When we do fill the casks here on site, we use that same water to reduce down to cask strength. It goes down, it's matured just a mile down the road, and our warehouse is just behind the village where there's some very nice caravans, I believe. And then it comes back up here and it's bottled with the same water. So everything's done on Raasay.
Alisdair, take your Raasay hat off. What are you drinking?
It depends on my mood, obviously. It depends who I'm with, where I am. But it would be something like a Balvenie or a Caligula.
Okay. We talked about future Raasay. Let's talk about the future of Campbelltown, because this is a big deal for you, right? So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in, I think, 2021, end of November, beginning of December, we bought Jury Farm down in Campbelltown. So we've been growing barley there. This is our second season of growing barley, so we're growing it completely regeneratively, minimum inputs. And just a couple of weeks ago, we distilled the Jury Farm barley here at Raasay Distillery. So that's a big step forward, but obviously we've got our planning application in for Machrihanish Distillery and Jury Farm. And that's very, again, just like regeneratively growing barley, the whole focus on that distillery is being as sustainable as possible, and no fossil fuels and no chimneys. And so we're working that process. At the minute, we're working through a planning application. All things being well, we might break ground, end of this year, beginning of next year, and we might be distilling in 2025, and we might have some whisky in 2028. So.
Do you just look at the map of Scotland and go, where's the most difficult place to build a distillery?
Well, we have learned a lot from Raasay, and some of the real positive things about Raasay are the fact that it is a wee island, 14 miles long, 3 miles wide, same size as Manhattan, with a population of 161. That's a big plus, because the community, there's 40 people employed here at the distillery, all live in Raasay, so it's a big part of it. So when we're talking about a second distillery, that it's actually a fact. We were going, well, what's another rural community?
Yeah.
Because it works for us, and it also helped the fact that Bill's grandma's from Drumlemble, which is halfway between Machrihanish and Campbelltown, and his uncle was a greenkeeper at Machrihanish Dunes. So
Bill being the other
co-founder. Co-founder.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it as well. The fact that Campbelltown was the Victorian whisky capital of Scotland, and all of that helps.
I love it. I mean, we were chatting earlier on over dinner about Campbelltown and how that rejuvenation has come around within Campbelltown. It almost fell off the map as a whiskey making region, right? And we're talking, hopefully within 2 years, we're going to have 6 distilleries down there from.
It's fantastic, and I have to say, the support we've had from Springbank and Glen Scotia and obviously Glengale as well. That support that they've given us has just been fantastic, and
that's
great. Amazing.
That's great. So to wrap up here, guys, thank you so much for having us. Amazing to be here, and anyone who's listening, it's a long way to come when you're in Scotland, but it is absolutely worth it. What these guys have done here with regards to hospitality, distilling their whiskey, you guys have got the whole package. And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass because I'm sitting here right now and you invite me along. But if someone's interested in Raasay and they want to come here, what's the best way for them to book? Obviously online, your website.
Absolutely. So our website, you can book. We've got 6 ensuite bedrooms here. Got a restaurant now, bar, so you can do that. You can book a tour, but it's also we're also on booking.com and all of these things as well. You can find us.
I love that. Modern day distilling right there. Like everything, tick all the boxes.
Thank you very much.
Well, guys, thank you very much for having us. Audience, thank you very much for being here. And everyone listening, thanks so much for listening in. Check out our next episode, which I've got no idea which is going to be because Nicholas is in Vegas right now doing something. We haven't chatted about it. But thank you so much for tuning in and see you next time.